So welcome everybody on today's webinar. My name is Iri Wallach. I'm product manager at Polar Software, and I will speak today about how to build a product backlog, a very important artifact in Agile development. Why me, and why we at Polarion would like to speak about Enterprise Agile? One reason is that, of course, we have full support for project management, for Agile project management. We have the Aeon Scrum project template in our Polarion Aeon solution. And actually, it's the same project template that our internal Polarion development team is using. So we have a lot of experience with Scrum development in-house. We do have professional services that set up the Scrum projects for many of our customers. And we would like to share this experience with you. What's the goal? The product backlog is actually a very key artifact in Agile project management. The description says that the product backlog is based on product owner being able to understand the customer wishes and translate them into the user story-like backlog. And the question is how we can rely on the product owner that such backlog really exists and it's well prioritized in a way that at the end your products sell well. And the question is really, is it correct to put it all on shoulders of product owner, or is the product backlog shared across the organization so there is no clear responsibility? Or how we can really ensure that you have a good product backlog? Let's just start with first summarizing the definition of what is a product backlog. I mean, very often I search the Wikipedia just because, not that I like the definition, but it's kind of a common definition that most people agree on. And based on that definition, the product backlog is an ordered list of requirements. The items are ordered by the product owner based on considerations like risk, business value, dependencies. And the features added to the backlog are commonly written in a story format. So the product backlog is the what that will be built, sorted in relative order it should be built in. That's the definition. I think it's quite weak. I don't fully understand it completely. So my preference would be to just concentrate on common goals. One goal of a product backlog, from my understanding, of course, we know the technology, but just when I read it from Wikipedia, I understand, or my preference is to understand it like it's a set of increments that drives the development. This is what I would like to read when I speak about a product backlog. So the product backlog is used when you plan your sprints, your iterations. So this is where you select the task, the increments that drives the development. It describes the minimal marketable scope. This is very important that at least the minimal marketable feature scope is described in the product backlog. So at the end, I know that the solution will be ready to be used by the users. And it should be sorted in a best implementation order, whatever it is. This is my expectation, what I would like to get from the product backlog. And now the question is how we can ensure it, and how does product owner really helps with that. Before, let's speak about the actual structure of the backlog, or of the information. So what should be created? What items exist? And I will give you some examples. So these examples are actually gathered from our internal project. So we were speaking that at the end, the product backlog is just the set of user stories. We have these two examples, like I as a user must enter my username and password when approving a requirement or performing other sign-in. So we have a set of increments that speaks in the user story way. If I need to be sure that there is something like a minimal marketable feature scope, I need to understand the stories from a bigger scope. You can imagine that the user story I was speaking about is motivating by the support of FDA CFR 11, the support for electronic signatures. We call it epics. So the epics is a container of the user stories. Still pretty common so far. We are just thinking about the correct structure of a backlog before we can understand how to prioritize it. And above the epics, there is something like a theme for a release. And this is a typical structure of the information that a company that is producing products is dealing with. No matter if you have a product owner or not, you need to really think about teams, epics, and stories. And if you want to be sure that we can compute the cost-benefit ratio so we have the best implementation order, we need to have such a structure. And now let's think about how to estimate the benefit. The good thing is that to understand the benefit, you can start from the top. On top, I need to agree on a strategy. The strategy just defines, how can I ensure that the result will be successful on the market? And the strategy, it's a hypothetical strategy for Plarion software for a year Plarion 2011, is that you can have a team like customers in our industry need to be compliant with different standards. And also you can define a strategy, how much budget or effort you want to speak on or you want to spend on strategical improvements, gathering new customers, and how much you want to spend on maintenance and improving the existing functionality. And based on the teams, there are business analysts that defines, that in our industry, 30% of customers need electronic signatures. And you can think about the requirements and what is really a must-have to support electronic signatures. And based on the epics, you create user stories. So the point is that to understand that user story has a big benefit, I need to understand the benefit of the parent. So more or less, the benefit of the stories are computed top to the bottom. For stories that are actually requested through the epics. Of course, I can have other kind of stories, like that comes from real customers, that I can sort by different criteria. So I can have a user story that speaks about bulk edit of more than 100 items, and I can think about a benefit like how many customers are actually requesting it. So the very important thing is that if you want to really estimate the benefit, you should not mix these categories of stories together. How we solve it is that we don't recommend just one single backlog for estimating the benefit, but rather really have an isolated backlog. So like you can have a features backlog that speaks only about a strategical improvement. You can have a support backlog that contains items coming through the support channel. You can have a customer requests that are in so-called demand backlog. So it's pretty easy to estimate the benefit of the items that are somehow similar. So it's very difficult, to compare the benefit of a support issue comparing to the feature. But if you just concentrate on the support issues, or if you concentrate on features, you can compare the items together. We speak about the cost. It's quite similar. We can still concentrate on the analysis from top to the bottom. So on the top, we have the teams, and we just agree on how we distribute the budget or the time. So we can agree that what are the most important teams, what we need. We can define the strategy, and for every team, we can create an epics. The epics are estimated by t-shirt sizes. So you can just estimate the size if this is extra small, small, medium large, or extra large. And in the same way as you plan your sprint based on velocity, so you estimate the story points for every story, you can just estimate the size of the epic. And then for each story, you estimate the cost by the story point. So it's very important again that if you want to estimate the epics and stories, you use different numbers. Because principally, you don't have enough information when you estimate the epic to estimate the actual number of points, but you can still somehow compare the epics together and estimate the size. So now, how do you compute the priority? The priority is more or less the cost-benefit ratio. And as you were saying is, you have multiple backlogs. And if you have multiple backlogs, you have priority that is computed for each backlog separately. So every backlog has its own priority. You don't have a number that is somehow common. So you don't want to compare the priority of customer enhancements with a priority of the user story of a strategical improvement, because this is almost impossible. But you can always compute the priority for each backlog separately. And the strategy is that actually defines the distribution of a sub-backlogs. Let me just show the structure. So what do you have at the end? You have multiple backlogs. So multiple categorization of the user stories, like a features backlog, a customer request backlog, a support backlog. In our case, we have actually more of them. So you have also backlogs that is related to the process improvements. We have a backlog that is related to performance improvements. And we just define a strategy how to spread the effort on each backlog separately. It's important that the actual priority number might be really different from backlog to the backlog. So I don't need really to think about some hypothetical number how to compare a defect and a feature together. So far, it's pretty simple. I mean, all I need is to gather items together in a backlog. I can have multiple backlogs. I estimate the cost from the top to the bottom. I think about the benefits. Again, I mean, in a support backlog, the benefit is explained more or less by the support level. So the customers with gold support has the biggest priority, biggest benefit. For a features backlog, the benefit depends on the other criteria. And I can imagine that the product owner is able to do such a prioritization. But actually, it's not that allow us to say that we have a solution and we can really rely on the product owner, because the problem is actually the content. So quite easy to prioritize the stories when they exist. But how do I actually ensure that we have the user stories that actually describes our expectations or the business expectations? Here's the point that let's speak quickly about what do we expect from the content. So the user stories, as we can read from the title, should speak in a story way. This is important because we want everybody in the development team to understand the demand in the user's scenario way. It is a product increment because, of course, at the end, the user story motivates a developer to improve something in a product. So this is a key point that drives the enhancements in the product. It's properly sized because if you have too big stories, it's pretty hard to estimate them, and your velocity is typically not very reliable. And the set of user stories describes the minimal marketable feature scope. So at the end, you have a complete description of your epic, of your release. In the same way, I mean, the preference is that the stories are not overlapping, because if they are overlapping, it's again pretty difficult to estimate them, and you cannot reorder the elements easily because there is not a clear description what is the increment in the user story, behind the user story. They should not, be written without understanding the technology behind. at least roughly, because if you just describe the story without even understanding the technology, it would be very, very difficult to estimate it again. And you should always think if the user story is consistent with other stories. So there are lots of the actual requirements how the user stories should be designed. And now the question is how we really ensure it. So how we can rely on the product owner that we have the stories really prepared like that. And the actual one of the solution is that what you need is to be sure there is enough domain knowledge, whatever your products are about, that is available to all the people. Comparing to user stories, the domain knowledge are typically very unstructured. They're heavily overlapping. I mean, if you speak about requirements, so when you have a business analyst that is providing the information to your product owners and developers, lots of requirements are heavily overlapping. Lots of requirements are not aware of the technology, what is actually used at the end. The content is very unstructured, but at the end, you need all these requirements. You can imagine this, that you have a story, again, our example that speaks about electronic signatures, and behind a simple user story, there might be a lot of unstructured requirements that are behind. And the problem if you rely on a single user, a product owner, that he would gather and ensure all these requirements. So the product owner, the primary role of the product owner is to facilitate the collaboration of the business and technology. You can define the role of the product owner as a single individual that is responsible to translate the set of overlapping requirements into a list of product increments. Here below, you have the more or less the organization chart of how we work. So we have lots of stakeholders. There are our customers, there is a product management team, there are sales and professional services organization, we have a development team, we have a customer requests, and at the end, you need to be sure that all the information at the end appears in a backlog. The backlogs are managed by the product owner, so it's prioritized. It's the product owner estimates the effort, but he's not responsible to gather all this information or to write it down. The product owner is responsible to ensure that the information is transferred from the business, from the users, to the R&D team. And how does Polarion really helps with this? The most important thing is that if you want really such a collaboration, you need to provide a collaborative environment for it. The first thing is that the people need to share data. So if there is a business analyst, all the information that is provided should be shared by all the people. From some point of view, if you read a Agile description, it says that the best collaboration is face-to-face communication. But contrary to that is that you don't want to have a bottlenecks in your team. And if you really make a product owner the only individual that is aware of the requirements, then it is simply a bottleneck. So what is better is to ensure that all the requirements are written by the business analyst in a very unstructured way, in overlapping way, so the business analyst can just use our LiveDoc technology to easily write down all the expectations, user requirements, business requirements, performance requirements in an unstructured way and share it with all the people. Of course, it's not only a set of such requirements, but you can also share all the customer requests. And just because you can freely modify the data model in Polarion, you can easily have different tools, different technology to gather customer requests or requirements for a business analyst. Visibility. The business analyst or the product owner when they work with the system, they must be sure that the data are not only shared on a demand, so it's quite easy to have a different set of point solutions. You can have a support ticket management tool. You can have a tool, Microsoft SharePoint, to manage the business analyst documents, so requirement specification documents, and all the people can share the information, but they can share it, but they will be still invisible. Why? Because the information will not be traceable. So if there is a customer demand, it must be possible to link this customer demand with a requirement that is offered by a R&D team, or it must be possible to link data together so they become visible. With Polarion, you can link items across the project. So it's possible to link user stories with epics, with requirements, everything together. So all the data are just one click away. So you can use just one click to navigate around the data. And this is what is the difference between visibility and sharing. So sharing allows you to browse what you know that exists, and the visibility makes you aware of a data that you are not aware that it exists. Agility, change always happens. So no matter, what is requested at the beginning, so no matter how the product owner prioritized the backlog in the beginning, the system must be prepared for the possible change. The customer requests might be changed. There might be a new information that is reported by a customer to a support backlog item. And this information should be immediately visible again to all the product members. And if it is visible, you should see the impact on all the reports. So ideally, all the reports are live. And the live reporting that is provided by the Polarion helps understanding the impact of every single change. That's the process that we use internally. So not relying on a product owner being really the single individual that describes all the improvements, the only individual who is responsible to describe everything, but use a product owner as a facilitator of the collaboration, collaborate heavily on the individual artifacts. We don't believe that the information might be shared only verbally. So we think that it's better to provide nice tools to business analysts to write down the requirements in written, very nice interface, our live document interface. Make sure that the items are traceable, so link them together. And use a cost-benefit analysis that is not across all the elements, but rather have an isolated backlogs that at the end drive a development based on the strategy that is defined on the beginning. So the strategy defines how do I combine the backlogs together. If you want to learn more, there is a nice big ebook provided by our R&D leader, Nick Anton. You can find it on our pop site, the site where we host all the Polarion extensions and also some of the information. So you can just navigate to this URL and read more of it offline. I'll have a look if there are any questions. Some of my colleagues are not able to attend this webinar. Is it possible to email me the presentation so I can share it with them? Yes. After this webinar, we will provide you the link with a recording. Doesn't this discussion of different backlogs speak to portfolio management, where you define initiatives and write up the stories accordingly? Having these separate backlogs seems to unnecessarily complicate things. Actually, we think that these separate backlogs are more complex, more complicated, but you cannot make it simpler. Just because if you really try to compare the priority of the support issue, customer request, or a strategical improvement, it's very difficult to actually define a common priority. It might happen that you will spend most of the time just on the strategical improvements because you mark all of them as part of a minimal marketable feature scope, and there is no time that you actually spend on the customer requests, even though the original agreement was that you would like to or you have to follow the ideas of your customers. And to create a common, or to really estimate it in a way that the priority is the single number that is distributed across the backlogs, is too difficult. And it's much easier at the end to have separated backlogs and compare the items and sort them in each backlog separately. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much for your time, and we will send you the recording afterwards. Bye-bye.
For full recorded webinars, visit Polarian.com, click on the Events and Webinars tab, and click on Recorded Webinars. Or take the next Polarian steps.